Ellie, if you can't keep it together, maybe you shouldn't come home at all. The words echoed in my mind as I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the computer screen. The phone call from Officer Daniels still reverberated through my head, dulling my senses. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Parker, but there's been an accident. Your parents, they didn't survive. I hung up, choking on my tears. My parents, on their way to the Grand Canyon for their annual road trip, gone in an instant. I fumbled for my phone, dialing my husband, Mike. Mike, I need you. My parents. My voice cracked. Ellie, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can't this wait? Mike's irritation pierced through the line. They're dead, Mike. My parents are dead. I sobbed, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Silence. Then, with a sigh, Ellie, if you can't keep it together, maybe you shouldn't come home at all. He hung up. Stunned, I dropped the phone. The hum of the office felt distant as I rushed out, barely noticing my colleagues' concerned glances. The drive home was a blur. When I arrived, Mike was already there, standing in the kitchen. Ellie, you're blowing this out of proportion, he said, barely looking up. My parents just died, I shouted. How can you be so cold? Look, it's not my fault. You need to handle this better. He snapped back, turning away to avoid my gaze. I retreated to our bedroom, tears streaming down my face. Memories of my parents flooded in. Thanksgivings, road trips, their laughter. Everything was shattered. I felt alone, misunderstood, even in my own home. Later that night, after putting our daughter Lizzie to bed, I approached Mike again. We need to talk about the funeral. I have a big project due. I might not make it, he said flatly, tapping on his laptop. Can't you see what I'm going through? My voice trembled, anger mixing with grief. Ellie, I'm tired. We'll talk tomorrow. And with that, he walked out, leaving me alone with my pain. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices. By morning, I was numb. I typed out the obituary, made funeral arrangements, all while Lizzie asked why Grandma and Grandpa weren't coming back. I couldn't find the words to explain. Days passed, blending into a haze. The neighborhood sympathy offered little comfort. Everyone's questions, their pitying looks, made it worse, and Mike's indifference was a knife twisting deeper into my heart. The day of the funeral, I dressed Lizzie in her best dress. Why isn't Daddy coming? She asked quietly. He has work, sweetheart, I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady for her sake. At the funeral, standing beside the caskets, I felt utterly hollow. Friends and family offered condolences, but I barely registered their presence. Cheryl, Mike's mother, approached me with a look of forced sympathy. Such a tragedy, she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. Have you thought about the inheritance? It might help with expenses. I stared at her, disbelief blending with fury. My parents just died. How can you talk about money? I'm just being practical, dear. Someone has to be, she replied, patting my shoulder in a mock display of comfort. Her words left me even more broken. Cheryl never cared about anyone but herself and her son. That night, I sat in the dark, my resolve hardening. My parents deserved justice, and I wouldn't let Mike's apathy or his mother's greed tarnish their memory. It was time to face the harsh reality of my life and take control. As the moonlight filtered through the window, I made a silent vow. Things would change. I would not let their deaths be in vain, and I would not remain trapped in this loveless, uncaring marriage any longer. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I spent every moment arranging services, choosing flowers, coordinating with the funeral home. Mike remained distant, claiming work obligations kept him busy. The weight of his indifference crushed me. One evening, I caught him slinking into the house late. Where were you? I demanded. Work. Had to stay late, he replied, avoiding eye contact. Late again? Every night this week, Mike? My voice cracked with frustration. Ellie, I told you, it's a big project, he snapped. He brushed past me and headed to our bedroom, closing the door behind him. I stood there, feeling more alone than ever. The night before the funeral, Cheryl showed up unannounced. She breezed into the living room, her perfume overwhelming. Ellie, how are you holding up? She asked, her tone insincere. Doing what I can, I replied, keeping my eyes on the carpet. Cheryl's gaze shifted to the closed bedroom door. Where's Mike? Still working, I said through gritted teeth. That man works too much, she tutted, then turned her attention back to me. So have you decided what's happening with their estate? I clenched my fists. Cheryl, it's not the time. Don't be so emotional, Ellie. This is about practicality, she said, her voice cool. My parents are gone, Cheryl. I can't think about money right now, I replied, barely holding back tears. Well, you need to. Mike and Lizzie need security, she continued, as if she wasn't intruding on my grief. Mike and Lizzie are not my immediate concern, I snapped, standing my ground. She huffed, clearly displeased. Fine, Ellie, but don't take too long. This is important for the family. As soon as she left, I collapsed onto the couch, the weight of everything suffocating me. Mike's absence, Cheryl's greed, the loss of my parents. It was too much. I needed to stay strong for Lizzie, but my resolve was slipping. The funeral day arrived, gray and somber. I dressed in black, every motion robotic. Lizzie clung to my side, sensing the gravity of the day, even if she didn't fully understand. As we approached the church, Mike's car was nowhere to be seen. He had promised to meet us there, but the empty space felt like a slap. Inside, the service began. The minister spoke kind words about my parents, but all I could think about was Mike's empty seat. When it was my turn to speak, I choked back tears just looking at the sea of sympathetic faces. Afterward, at the reception, Cheryl approached again. You need to think about Lizzie's future, she said, cornering me by the refreshment table. I'm trying to get through today, I said, my voice breaking. Ellie, you're the mother now. You have responsibilities, she lectured, her eyes hard. I'm well aware of my responsibilities, Cheryl, I replied sharply, barely containing my anger. Her face twisted in disapproval. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she muttered before walking away. Standing there, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, something inside me hardened. Mike's coldness, Cheryl's incessant greed, these weren't just inconveniences. They were part of a larger problem, a toxic burden I didn't need to carry. I looked down at Lizzie, her innocent face looking up at me. For her sake, I knew I had to act. I couldn't rely on Mike or endure Cheryl's manipulation any longer. My parents' death had shattered my world. Now I had to rebuild it, stronger for both of us. It was time to make some changes, and I knew exactly where to start. As days turned into weeks after the funeral, I noticed Mike's absences becoming more frequent and his excuses thinner. Each late-night return chipped away at the fragile remnants of our marriage. One evening, while Lizzie was engrossed in her homework, I cornered him in the kitchen. Where have you been, Mike? I asked, my voice steady. Work, Ellie. I told you, he replied, avoiding eye contact as he rummaged through the fridge. Work? Really? I crossed my arms. You smell like cheap perfume. He froze, then turned to face me, his expression hardening. You're imagining things. Maybe you should get help. I scoffed, fury boiling up. Don't turn this on me. I know something's going on. You're paranoid, he snapped, grabbing a soda and slamming the fridge door shut. I watched him walk away, a decision forming in my mind. If he wouldn't come clean, I'd find out myself. I had to know the truth for my and Lizzie's sake. The next day I made a call to a private investigator. Hello, Mr. Harris. I need to find out what my husband's up to, I explained, feeling a mix of desperation and resolve. Mr. Harris was efficient. Within a week he had gathered enough evidence to fill a small folder. We met in a nondescript cafe, him sliding the folder across the table. You were right to suspect, Mrs. Parker. He's been seeing a woman named Kim Blackwood. She works at a local bar. My heart pounded as I flipped through the photographs. Mike with Kim, laughing, holding hands, even kissing in public. Betrayal stabbed at me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Thank you, Mr. Harris, I said, my voice steady. I'll take it from here. That night, I confronted Mike when he finally showed up. Care to explain these? I tossed the folder onto the couch. His eyes widened as he saw the contents. Ellie, I can explain, he stammered. Explain what? That you've been lying to me? Cheating on me? My voice rose with each word. It's not what it looks like, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Because it looks like you've been with her for months, I shot back, my anger giving me strength. Work's been stressful, Ellie. You've been so distant. Don't you dare blame this on me. I interrupted, my body shaking with rage. You betrayed our family. You betrayed Lizzie. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. I want a divorce, Mike, and you're going to pay for what you've done. His face turned from guilt to anger. You think you can just take Lizzie away from me? I'll fight you on this. I have more than enough evidence. Any court would side with me, I said, standing tall. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about our daughter, and she deserves better. Mike stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, breathing heavily, the house silent except for the ticking of the clock. Lizzie was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm that had just erupted. The next morning, I began gathering more evidence, financial records, text messages, anything that would secure my case. Each piece of proof was another step toward freeing myself and protecting Lizzie. I contacted a lawyer, determined to proceed strategically. "We have a strong case," the lawyer assured me. "With the evidence you've provided, we can ensure full custody and a hefty alimony. Your husband won't stand a chance." Hearing those words bolstered my resolve. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my life and safeguarding Lizzie's future. I was ready to fight, and I wouldn't back down until justice was served. I sat in the lawyer's office, the divorce papers in front of me. My hands felt steady as I signed each page. My attorney, Mrs. Grant, gave a nod of approval. "We've got a strong case, Ellie. Present these to Mike and he'll realize he can't win." Leaving the office, I felt a strange mix of determination and dread. I drove straight home, needing to confront Mike immediately, armed with the legal documents and unshakable resolve. He was sitting on the couch, watching TV, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing. "Mike, we need to talk," I said, standing in front of him, blocking the screen. He looked up, irritated. "What now, Ellie?" I tossed the papers onto his lap. "These. Sign them." He glanced at them, his face slowly turning red as he realized what they were. "Divorce papers? You've got to be kidding me." He stood up, towering over me. "I'm done, Mike. I want out. And I'm taking Lizzie with me," I replied, not backing down. His face twisted in anger. "You think you can just walk away and take my daughter? I'll fight this. I'll ruin you, Ellie. You'll never get custody." "I've got plenty of evidence to prove you're unfit," I shot back. "Your affair, your neglect, I'll make sure the court sees it all." He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You really think you can beat me? I'll drag you through the mud. I'll make sure everyone knows you're the unstable one. You won't have a leg to stand on." "Do what you want, Mike. I'm not backing down. Lizzie deserves better than this toxic environment." "You think you're some kind of hero?" "You're nothing without me, Ellie," he sneered. I felt a surge of anger. "I'm stronger than you think, and I'll prove it. Sign the papers, Mike, or I'll see you in court." For a moment we stood there, glaring at each other. Finally, he snatched the papers and threw them to the ground. "This isn't over, Ellie. Not by a long shot." I picked up the papers, my resolve strengthened by his threats. "We'll see about that." Over the next week, Mike's threats became more intense. He called me at all hours, leaving angry voicemails. He showed up at my job, trying to cause scenes, but my coworkers helped keep him at bay. It was exhausting, but I refused to let him see me falter. One evening, I heard him on the phone with his mother. "She's trying to ruin me, Mom. I need to find a way to take Lizzie away from her." Cheryl's voice came through, sharp and manipulative. "We'll fight this together, Mike. She won't stand a chance against us." I knew they'd stop at nothing to hurt me, to take Lizzie from me. But I wouldn't let them. I had the support of my lawyer, my friends, and my undeniable evidence. I had to be strong for Lizzie. I called Mrs. Grant. "We need to proceed. His threats are escalating." "We'll move quickly," she assured me. "Stay strong, Ellie. We've got this." The next morning, Mike received an official notice to appear in court. His fury was evident as he stormed into the house, waving the papers. "You think you can win this?" "Yes," I replied simply, "because it's the truth." "This is war, Ellie," he spat, throwing the papers at my feet. "So be it," I said, standing firm. For Lizzie, for my parents' memory, and for myself, I would not back down. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. I sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, my heart beating fast. I clutched the divorce papers in my hand, waiting for Mike to arrive. The sounds of steaming milk and clinking cups filled the air, but I was focused on the door. When Mike finally walked in, his eyes locked onto me with a look of sheer contempt. He sat down roughly, not bothering with pleasantries. "What do you want, Ellie?" "I want this over with." "You need to sign these," I said, pushing the papers towards him. He glanced at them, his jaw tightening. "I told you, I'm not signing anything. You think you can just waltz in here and dictate everything?" "You had your chance, Mike. Now it's about protecting Lizzie and moving on." He sneered. You're delusional if you think you're getting any money from me. And Lizzie? Over my dead body. As he spoke, his boss Derek entered the cafe. Derek was heading to the counter when he recognized Mike and turned towards us, encouraged by visible intrigue. Mike, what's going on here? Derek asked, eyes shifting between us. Mike's face turned pale. Nothing, sir. Just a family matter. Looks like more than that, Derek said, his gaze narrowing at the sight of the papers on the table. Ellie, Mike hissed, attempting to maintain his composure. This isn't the place. I seized the moment. Actually, it is. Mike, you've been lying and cheating for months. You've neglected your family and your job. Derek raised an eyebrow. Is this true? Mike stumbled over his words. It's complicated. She's blowing things out of proportion. No, Mike, I shot back. You've been spending company time with your mistress, not on work projects. Derek's expression shifted from curiosity to cold anger. Is this true, Mike? Sir, I can explain. Derek cut him off. Save it. I've had my suspicions. Consider this your last day at the office. Mike's face turned red, his anger barely contained. You can't do that. I just did, Derek replied sharply, turning and walking away. I watched Mike crumble before me, his career crashing as he realized there was no escaping this time. The cafe's ambient noise returned, but we were in a bubble of silence. You've ruined everything, Mike hissed, his voice shaking with rage. No, Mike, you did that all by yourself, I said, standing up. Mark my words, Ellie. I'm taking you down with me, he said through gritted teeth. Good luck with that, I replied, picking up the papers. As I walked out, I felt a surge of liberation. This battle was far from over, but I'd just won a significant victory. Outside the cafe, I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air. Mike's downfall had begun, and I was ready to fight for our daughter's future. Every step I took away from that confrontation was another step towards justice, for my parents, for Lizzie, and most importantly, for myself. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as I walked in, head held high. Mrs. Grant was beside me, a reassuring presence. Mike sat across the room, his face a mask of anger and defiance. His lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, whispered something into his ear. The judge called for silence. We're here today to consider custody and alimony arrangements for the Parker case, the judge announced. Mrs. Grant stood, addressing the court. Your Honor, we have clear evidence of Mr. Parker's infidelity and neglect, both as a husband and father. We request full custody for my client, Mrs. Parker, and appropriate alimony and child support. Mr. Jacobs rose, looking smug. Your Honor, Mr. Parker disputes these accusations. He has been a dedicated father and deserves joint custody at the very least. The judge nodded, flipping through the files. Mrs. Parker, please step forward. I straightened my back as I approached the stand. Can you describe your husband's involvement with your daughter, Lizzie? Mike has been absent, that both physically and emotionally, I began. He's focused on his affair and neglected his responsibilities at home. Lizzie needs stability, which I can provide. Mrs. Grant then presented the evidence. Photos, text messages, financial records, all condemning Mike. I saw his face redden as each piece of evidence was displayed. The judge looked over the documents carefully. It seems clear that Mr. Parker has been preoccupied with his affair, he said, turning to Mike. Do you have anything to say? Mike stood, his body rigid. Your Honor, this is all blown out of proportion. I've provided for my family. Ellie's just trying to ruin me. Mrs. Grant interjected. Your Honor, Lizzie's well-being is our priority. Mr. Parker's actions have shown he's incapable of being a responsible parent. At that moment, the courtroom doors creaked open and a man walked in. It was Kim's husband, Dave. He approached the judge, holding a stack of papers. Your Honor, if I may, Dave said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. I, too, have evidence against Mr. Parker and my wife, Kim. Mr. Parker's actions have not only hurt his family, but mine as well. The judge allowed him to submit the documents. Dave outlined how their affair had affected his family, detailing financial discrepancies and deceit. The courtroom listened intently, the atmosphere thick with tension. After a thorough review, the judge spoke. Mr. Parker, given the overwhelming evidence, I rule in favor of Mrs. Parker. She is granted full custody of Lizzie and significant alimony and child support. Mike's face registered defeat. This isn't fair, he muttered under his breath. The judge continued. Furthermore, these financial records suggest potential fraud. This will be investigated separately. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. As the proceedings concluded, Mike shot me a venomous look. "This isn't over, Ellie." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, it is, Mike. Yes, it is." Outside the courtroom, Dave approached me. "I'm sorry for everything. Let's make sure they pay for what they've done." "Agreed," I said, feeling a sense of camaraderie. As I walked to my car, I called Mrs. Grant. "Thank you for everything. What's next?" "We'll finalize the paperwork, and then we'll look into those hidden accounts your investigator found," she replied. I nodded, determination burning within me. This battle was almost won, but the war wasn't over. Mike's deceit would lead to his downfall, and I was prepared for the next fight. With Lizzie by my side, there was nothing that could break me now. The knock on my door was sharp and insistent. I opened it to find a stern-faced detective holding a warrant. "Mrs. Parker, may we come in?" I stepped aside, heart pounding. "What is this about?" The detective nodded to his partner. "We're here to search for documents related to Mr. Parker's offshore accounts. We have reason to believe he's been hiding assets." My mind raced. Mike had lied and cheated, and now his financial deceit was coming to light. "Take whatever you need," I said, leading them to Mike's old office. While the detectives sifted through papers, I called Mrs. Grant. "They're searching the house for evidence of Mike's hidden accounts." "Good," she replied. "This will only strengthen our case. Stay calm and cooperate." As the detectives worked, I found myself outside, watching Lizzie play in the yard with our neighbor's children. She looked so carefree, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. Hours passed before the detective reappeared. "We've found enough to initiate a full investigation. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Parker. You'll be hearing from us soon." After they left, I was overwhelmed with a mix of relief and anticipation. This was another nail in Mike's coffin, another step toward justice. The next morning, I received a call from Derek. "Ellie, I wanted you to hear it from me. Mike's been arrested for fraud. The company's pressing charges." I closed my eyes, absorbing the news. "Thank you for letting me know, Derek." "This was inevitable," he sighed. "He crossed too many lines. Take care, Ellie." Mike's arrest unleashed a media frenzy. Cameras and reporters swarmed our neighborhood, seeking a statement. I kept a low profile, focusing on Lizzie and the life we were rebuilding. One evening, as I tucked Lizzie into bed, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mommy, is Daddy coming home?" I brushed her hair gently. "Not for a while, sweetheart, but you have me, and that's all we need right now." She nodded, trusting and innocent. "Okay, Mommy, I love you." "I love you too, Lizzie," I whispered, feeling the weight of my promise. I had to stay strong for her. Days turned into weeks. Mike's world continued to unravel. His assets were frozen, his accounts scrutinized. Cheryl tried to intervene, but her attempts were futile against the mounting evidence. I received a call from Kim one afternoon. "Ellie, it's Kim. Can we talk?" I hesitated, but curiosity and a need for closure prompted me. "Fine, come over." When she arrived, she looked worn. "I'm sorry for everything," she began, her voice shaky. "I didn't realize the extent of Mike's lies. He's ruined my life, too." I studied her, seeing the guilt and regret. "So what do you want from me?" "I just wanted to apologize and offer my support. What he did to both of us is unforgivable." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of solidarity with her. "Thank you, Kim, but Mike's actions have consequences, and we both have to live with that." As she left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Closure was coming, slowly but surely. Weeks later, the court verdict was in. Mike was found guilty of fraud and embezzlement. He faced years in prison, his reputation shattered, his life in ruins. Cheryl's health declined rapidly, and she moved into a care facility. Mike's network of lies had collapsed entirely. One afternoon, as Lizzie and I were playing in the yard, the sun shining brightly, I realized we had reached a turning point. "Mommy, are we okay now?" Lizzie asked, her innocence refreshing. "We are, Lizzie. We're better than okay," I said, scooping her into my arms. "This is our fresh start." She giggled, her laughter a sweet balm to my weary soul. For the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of hope. Our future was bright, untouched by the shadows of the past. Mike's downfall was complete, and in its wake we would rebuild, stronger than ever. The move to California was hectic but liberating. Lizzie and I left the shadows of our old life behind, embracing a fresh start. Our new home, a cozy bungalow bathed in sunshine, felt like hope personified. On the first day at her new school, Lizzie was nervous. "Do you think they'll like me, Mom?" I knelt to her level, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "They'll love you, Lizzie. Just be yourself." We walked into the school together, the hallways bustling with students. Mrs. Thompson, Lizzie's teacher, greeted us warmly. "We're so happy to have Lizzie join us." I watched Lizzie blend into her new classroom, her face lighting up with curiosity and excitement. I left, feeling lighter, hopeful for the first time in a long while. At my new job, the environment was invigorating. I dove into projects, the creativity and challenge renewing my spirit. My coworkers were friendly, and Jack, the head of our team, was especially kind. One afternoon, Jack invited me to lunch. We walked to a nearby cafe, the air filled with the scent of fresh coffee and pastries. "So how are you settling in?" Jack asked, his eyes warm and inviting. "Better than I expected. It's been a rocky year, but I feel like we're finally finding our footing," I replied. Jack nodded, his expression understanding. "New beginnings can be tough, but you seem strong. Lizzie's lucky to have you." "Thanks, Jack. It means a lot," I said, feeling a connection growing. Days turned into weeks. Lizzie thrived at school, making friends and excelling in her classes. Her laughter filled our home, a sweet reminder of our resilience. I found myself looking forward to work, where Jack's presence became a comforting constant. One Friday evening, Jack invited us over for a barbecue. "Bring Lizzie. It'll be fun," he said with a smile. At Jack's house, Lizzie played in the yard with his dog, her laughter echoing through the air. Jack and I stood by the grill, the smell of sizzling burgers making me feel at home. "You've created such a warm place here," I remarked, watching Lizzie chase the dog. "It's important to have a sanctuary," Jack replied, his tone sincere. "Everyone needs a safe place to heal." We sat on the patio, the evening turning cool. Jack turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Ellie, I've seen the strength it's taken to get where you are. You're incredible." I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks. "It's been a journey, but I couldn't let Mike's actions define us." "He doesn't deserve a second thought," Jack said firmly. "You and Lizzie deserve all the happiness in the world." As the night wrapped around us, I realized how much I had healed. Jack's kindness, Lizzie's laughter, our new life, it was more than I had hoped for. A few weeks later, as Lizzie and I walked along the beach, hand in hand, she looked up at me. "Mommy, do you think Daddy is sorry for what he did?" I paused, looking at the horizon. "Maybe. But what matters now is that we're happy. We're free to be ourselves." She nodded, her eyes bright. "I love our new life." "Me too, Lizzie," I said, squeezing her hand. "Me too." The sun set, casting a golden glow over the waves. I felt a deep sense of peace. Our past was behind us, replaced by a future filled with promise. Mike's deceit and cruelty no longer dictated our lives. We were free, resilient, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The journey had been long and painful, but it led us to this moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. And for that, I was profoundly grateful.